Okay, so you want to buy a container ship, a steel giant, 4 football fields long, 20,000 boxes, carving across the ocean while the money rolls in. But here is the strange part. The ship is the cheap part. That $200 million steel giant is the part that gets dragged onto a beach in Bangladesh and cut up for scrap, sold for maybe 10 million. The steel is almost the least valuable thing in this entire business, and the people who get genuinely rich moving the world's cargo mostly do not get rich from owning the boat at all. They get rich from 3 things you cannot see when you look at the ship: a slot through a canal, control of the cycle, and a flag that is not even from their own country. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what one of these things costs, who actually keeps the money, and the single brutal force that turns ship owners into billionaires one year and bankrupts them the next. Because this is the most violently cyclical business on Earth. In 2022, the Danish giant Maersk made about $30 billion in profit, more than it had made in the entire previous decade combined. 18 months later, that boom had almost completely evaporated. Same ships, same company. The money came from something else entirely. Let us start with what one actually costs, because there is a ladder here, and the steel is the easy part to price. At the bottom is a small feeder ship, the kind that shuttles a few hundred boxes between regional ports. You can pick one up for around $40 million. Move up to a mid-sized vessel, and you are into the low hundreds of millions, and at the very top sits the ultra-large container vessel, the 24,000 box monster, that runs between Asia and Europe. One of those costs somewhere between $150 and $250 million to build new. It sails for about 25 years, then a beach in Bangladesh. But here is the first thing nobody tells you. You do not buy one, you order a dozen. The giant lines order these in blocks of 10 or 20 at a time, which is exactly how a shipping company quietly commits $5 billion in a single afternoon. And here is the second thing nobody tells you. What it costs to build the ship has almost nothing to do with whether you make money. A brand new ship and a 15-year-old ship earn the exact same freight rate on the exact same day. The steel does not decide your fortune. The market does. But here is what really separates the people who understand this business from the people who just own boats. The price of the ship barely matters compared to where you build it and where you register it. About 90% of all large ships on Earth are built in just 3 countries: South Korea, China, and Japan. Yards like HD Hyundai and Samsung Heavy Industries hold order books years deep, which means if you want a new ship, you are waiting 2 to 3 years and taking a number behind everyone else. Then comes the part that sounds illegal and is completely normal. You almost certainly will not register your ship in your own country. You will fly what the industry politely calls a flag of convenience. The 3 biggest shipping registries on Earth are Panama, Liberia, and the Marshall Islands. Tiny places that, between them, register a huge share of the world's tonnage. More than 2/3 of all ships fly a flag that is not their owners, because flagging in these places means lower taxes, cheaper crews, and lighter regulation. The owner sits in Geneva or Singapore or Copenhagen. The ship, on paper, belongs to Monrovia. The flag is not decoration. The flag is the tax structure, so you understand the ladder and you understand the arbitrage. Now, how do you actually get hold of one? You have 3 real options, and only one of them is smart. The first is to build new, wait 3 years, and pray the market is still high when your ship finally launches. The highest ceiling, and by far the most ways to lose. The second is to buy second-hand, which is faster but means you are buying at today's prices, and prices are highest exactly when everyone feels confident, which is exactly the wrong time. The third, and the one the smart operators use, is to not own the ship at all. There is an entire hidden class of company that does nothing but own ships and lease them out. They are called tonnage providers, names like Seaspan, and the famous German investment funds that bankrolled half the world's fleet. The operators you have heard of. The ones with their names painted on the boxes charter a huge share of their fleet from someone else. The world's largest line, MSC, controls more than 6 million containers of capacity across roughly 900 ships, and it does not own all of them. They do not want to own a depreciating steel asset. They want to control the cargo and rent the steel. And if you want proof that the real money is in the invisible part, look at what happened at the Panama Canal in 2023. A drought dropped the water level so low that the canal had to cut the number of ships it would let through each day. Suddenly, the scarce thing was not the ship, it was the slot, and shipping companies began bidding in an emergency auction just to jump the queue. One operator paid almost $4 million for a single transit slot. Not for the ship, not for the cargo. For permission to pass through a stretch of water on a particular day. The ship was the thing they already owned. The slot was the thing worth a fortune. And these choke points are everything. The Suez Canal alone carries roughly 12% of all global trade. When a single ship, the Ever Given, wedged sideways across it in 2021, it blocked the canal for 6 days and held up close to $10 billion of trade every single day it was stuck. That is the version of the story that sounds exciting. Here is the part they leave off the brochure. Because if this business is so lucrative, why does almost everyone in it eventually go broke? Because there are two enormous costs hiding below the waterline. The first is simply running the thing. A large container ship can burn through $50,000 to $100,000 of fuel every single day at full speed. Add the crew, the insurance, the port fees, and the maintenance, and the ship is hemorrhaging money before it has earned a cent. And here is a detail that tells you everything about this business. One of these floating skyscrapers carrying cargo worth more than $1 billion is run by a crew of barely 25 people. The cargo is the point. The ship is just the box it travels in. As long as freight rates are high, you barely notice. The moment they fall, that daily burn becomes a noose. The second cost is the cycle itself, and it is the one that quietly terrifies everyone who has been in this business long enough to have lived through a crash. Shipping runs on the most punishing boom and bust cycle in the global economy. Rates spike. Everyone orders ships. Then every shipyard on Earth delivers at the same moment, 2 years later, into a market that no longer needs them. And the rates do not just soften, they collapse below the cost of the fuel to run the voyage. The ship is still sailing. It is just losing money with every mile. During the recent boom, the price to ship a single container from Asia to America went from around $1,500 to nearly $20,000. Then it fell almost all the way back. Owners who confused a spike for a permanent reality and ordered at the top are the ones who drown. But here is the part that nobody ordering a brand new fleet at the peak wants to put in writing. This is one of the great graveyards of capitalism. In 2016, the South Korean giant Hanjin Shipping, one of the largest container lines in the world, with a fleet of around 140 ships, simply ran out of money and collapsed. It was the biggest container shipping bankruptcy in history. Its ships were left drifting outside ports because no one would pay to unload them, with about $14 billion of cargo stranded at sea. A company that owned dozens of these steel giants was destroyed almost overnight by the cycle. And that is exactly why the smartest operators have stopped trying to win by owning the most steel. They do not fall in love with the ships, because the ships get scrapped and the cycle is merciless. They buy the things the cargo cannot move without. They buy the ports. Companies built around terminal operators like APM Terminals, PSA in Singapore, and DP World quietly own the docks, the cranes, and the gateways that every ship on Earth has to tie up to, and they collect their fee whether freight rates are high or low. Others control capacity by banding into giant alliances that between them command most of the world's east-to-west trade. And the cleverest of all simply charter their ships out at the top of the cycle and hand the risk to someone else. A container terminal, or a canal slot, or a long charter signed at the peak is now worth far more than the ship itself. And it never has to sail anywhere. The The ship rusts, burns fuel, and eventually gets beached and cut up for scrap. The dock just sits there and charges admission to the global economy. The principle is the one every survivor in this business eventually learns. The money was never in the ship. The ship is the part that depreciates, burns fuel, and ends its life on a beach in South Asia. The money is in owning the choke point the ship has to squeeze through, and the dock it has to stop at, and the timing of a cycle that the impatient always get wrong. You do not get rich owning the steel. You get rich owning the gateway the steel has to pass through, and renting it back to everyone desperate enough to move the world's cargo. So here is the question. If someone handed you a fully crewed container ship tomorrow, freshly chartered, quietly printing money at the top of the market, would you keep it and ride the cycle, betting the boom lasts? Or would you charter it out at the peak, take the cash, and get off the steel before the next wave of new ships floods the market and the rates collapse? Most people say they would hold. Most people go down with the ship. Tell me in the comments which one you actually are. I genuinely want to know.